Dave Gladish in the house. How you doing, Gladdy Daddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Kind of rough stories this morning. That Frank Perez story is just weird. And quite frankly, it was a lot easier when you thought of him as just some nasty villain. I get this email from Reggie Tisdale, says he was a great leader and just a sweet kid in 6th grade.
Did you see the picture of him in the paper? He looked like he had a baby face.
Yeah.
He didn't look his age. He looked very young.
And they showed a picture of him at 19 years old or 18 years old, and I'm like, God, I've seen him somewhere before. I'm going to have to ask my wife. I don't know where. I've seen that kid somewhere before. I mean, I coached a lot of different teams in the late 90s. Maybe he was on, or mid to late 90s. I coached in a lot of different areas, basketball and baseball and softball, and maybe he was around then. But it's a weird situation. Reggie Tisdale says he was a leader in the community and just uses leadership skills in bad ways. It's crazy.
Well, I like that note because it talked about the after-school activities for kids and keeping them involved and in ways to have an outlet within society and within the school systems. And we're losing that more and more with the cutbacks in education. So if you follow that along, I mean, in 10 years, are we going to say, how many other kids were lost to the streets or other bad activities because of the fact that they didn't have an outlet in the schools?
And part of it, if you really think about it, is how many couples that are raising kids that are, maybe anywhere from 5th grade to seniors in high school. They got to work, man. And if there's 2 people in the house, which is only about, half the households anymore, then they both got to work. So the kids are coming home alone. And that's a scary time, when there's nobody there when they get home. You know what I mean?
They have nothing to do but potentially get in trouble.
Walk out in the house and go hang out with Herbie and Sonia. And what are they going to do? Well, they got nothing to do.
Well, and it doesn't have to be just athletics, but you have the bands and the art classes and all the other things that some kids, maybe they're not athletes, but there's other outlets out there for them, but it's being taken away more and more.
Dave Gladish is in the house. We're going to go around the law world
we
do every couple. Let's talk about some of the stuff going on in the legal world.
Well, what do you want to talk about first? Do you want to talk about Amanda Knox?
I want to talk about Amanda Knox. We have not given that enough coverage here on WJOB.
Well, I've got a couple stories here, and just so everybody understands, this case goes back a few years as relates to her being convicted. She spent the last 4 years in prison as relates to, she had a roommate from London. They're both exchange students, and they were residing together. And it seems that Amanda was out with her boyfriend, and when she comes back home, her roommate has been murdered. Now, you hear the family of the murdered girl, and again, I don't want to discount the emotions on that side of it, but you hear them on the news saying, well, we're not any closer to finding out the truth of what happened and so forth. But the reality is there was an individual who was convicted along with Amanda and her boyfriend. He was from the Ivory Coast, and his name is Rudy Guede, I guess, Guedee. And he was the one who basically attacked her, attempted to rape her, and cut her throat. And the problem was when Amanda came back from dinner, she was questioned by the authorities in Italian, and she was not fluent in Italian at that point in time, but we now know that she is, based upon spending 4 years in prison. Of course, she got very good with her Italian, and basically what the police said that led to the initial conviction was that she was acting very weird and very strange as relates to their questioning of her. They said she was smiling, she was doing flips, she was sitting on her boyfriend's lap and kissing him and making faces at each other when something terrible had happened in their apartment. So that led them to believe that she was on drugs and that there was some type of sex game that went terribly awry. And basically it snowballed from there. Then they had the poor DNA testing and so on. Now, what's interesting in this situation is in the United States, we have our jury trials, and she had a jury trial, and she was convicted. Here, if we have in the state of Indiana, for example, if she would have gone to trial here, she would have had a 12-person jury hear her case, and if she was convicted, it would go to the Indiana Court of Appeals. The Indiana Court of Appeals would examine the record to see if there was an error made by the court in either instructing the jury or allowing certain evidence in or keeping certain evidence out. Those 3 judges would then render an opinion, the majority. In Italy, it was very different. They had 2 judges and another jury. So basically, that's something called a de novo review, which is a Latin term that literally means from the beginning. So basically, they had a whole new jury trial in this case with 2 judges instead of 1. and it seems like it was a much more refined process, and everything was much stricter. There was a stricter review of all the evidence. So it was a very different process than what we would expect to see in the United States, and it resulted in her acquittal. We're hearing now that the family has spent a tremendous amount of money. They're looking to try to recoup some of the amounts that they spent. Again, I could understand going back and forth to Italy, putting your life on hold, trying to get she was 20 years old at the time, she's 24 now, getting her out of a prison. I'm sure most families would do whatever they could, especially if they felt that their child is being wrongly incarcerated. So it's going to be very interesting to follow this story and hear what her life was like behind bars and so on and so forth.
Did you see the press conference?
I did. When you hear her talk, she seems to be a very sympathetic and nice individual. The question always becomes, you go into, and I like to travel. If you go into a foreign country, you're going to deal with their laws, their language, their customs, their practices. And it seems that she fell outside of what the norms were, at least the way the Italians felt that she should have been conducting herself. And I'm sure there was quite a bit of a language barrier there too. So, a 20-year-old, how fluent could she be in Italian unless she grew up there or unless she had Italian parents or something along those lines? So I'm sure that was a problem for her.
219-845-1100. Dave from Highland, how are you?
Great, Jed. Hey, Dave, got a question for you.
Sure.
It's your civil lawyer. It's with regards to civil trials. Can you give just a quick idea? Let's use Mayor Pastrick as an example. He wasn't convicted, but he was convicted in a civil trial, and he owes the people $106 million, right? Are there things that, assets that you cannot take from him in a civil trial? And let's say we found $20 million in his name in a bank in the Caymans, all right? Is there any way that you could recoup that money? And how exactly does civil, everyone knows the O.J. Simpson trial, how they couldn't touch his pension and they couldn't touch other assets he has, but yet they took everything else. Can you kind of explain that? And I'm just going to hang up and listen.
Okay.
Thanks.
First, I'll say that, I know Mayor Pastrick personally, and, I like the family very much. And just so we're clear, he used the term conviction twice. In a criminal trial, that's result in a conviction. In a civil case, that is a situation where you can be found liable to somebody and result in a monetary judgment. Now, I don't practice in the bankruptcy areas and so forth, but in reference to what property it can be attached falls within the bankruptcy protections, and actually the states differ as to that. Some states allow for more equity in a home, some states allow for less. Pensions, retirement programs, and so forth can all be protected. Now, we recently had an attorney locally, and actually I knew this attorney as well. He was recently indicted in Florida based upon actions up here where there was the Edgewater Hospital.
Fred Cuppy
in Chicago. He wasn't in Chicago, he was from Maryville, but in the Chicago setting with a hospital where there's the allegations that he helped his client hide assets. Have no idea whether it's true or not. But that's a situation where the attorney now is facing criminal prosecution in the federal courts for attempting to hide assets. So as an attorney, you can never advocate that your clients hide assets or not pay a judgment. I mean, you are an officer of the court. You're obligated, pursuant to Rule 11, to when you sign something that you're signing that is a truthful document and that you're not doing it to delay the proceedings. So we have obligations to make sure that we are acting as we should in front of the court. So just so we're clear, in a civil case, you're not convicted of anything. You're found liable. It's not a criminal conviction. If you are convicted in a criminal setting, though, that criminal conviction can be used in a civil setting if you plead guilty. So if we have an individual who pleads guilty to a criminal charge, that can be used in the civil case because it's an admission against interest as relates to liability if there's civil liability that arises from the criminal conduct.
219-845-1100. Let me just extend that one. There's an issue right now where Greg Zeller was on with the preacher the other day. I don't know if you heard that interview, but we'll play it again today. A lot of people want to hear it again.
And Greg's been on. You hear him a lot.
Yeah, we hear him a lot. And I don't know how a guy like Greg Zeller and a preacher have some sort of.
They went to a rooftop party together.
Exactly. I don't know. I mean, and they're kind of way different, but
sure.
They seem to get along. But anyways, he's going after a number of people in civil cases. He's done it downstate. Now he's going after, Verlissa Crenshaw out of the Maryville Town Court,
Correct.
who is a relative of Bernie Carter, the Lake County prosecutor. And then he's also going after the Pastrick and that kind of.
He's got several. There's one out in LaPorte now that we've also heard about where there was money taken.
The Republican trustee.
I think that's going to result. I'm guessing now, again, no actual knowledge, but I'm going to guess that maybe his claim, a civil claim to recoup that money that was taken, will result in criminal charges against that individual out in LaPorte. So, in reference to the Attorney General, they are the number one law enforcement person for the state of Indiana. They are the person who's supposed to act on behalf of the people. And Greg Zeller has been very diligent in trying to pursue what he feels are wrongs through the civil courts to collect monies for the people.
But then why isn't he filing criminal charges on these people, or is that a county jurisdiction?
That's a county jurisdiction, or we've got the situation in which we have the federal jurisdiction in some of these instances too. So the feds or the county can do it, but he can't do criminal ones. But he can only do civil. He's doing civil on behalf of the state. He is acting as on behalf of the state of Indiana
to recoup
Correct.
recoup that money. 219-845-1100. Let's go to your phone lines. Let's go to Steve on line 3. Hi, Steve.
Yeah, hi, Jim, Dave. Question for you, Dave. About this our right to a speedy trial here in this country. And I'm thinking about the Drew Peterson case in Illinois. Now that guy, it seems that he's been sitting in jail now for at least 2 years already without being brought to trial. I mean, what gives like that? To me that seems excessively long. I mean, what gives? I mean, or is it excessive or what?
Steve, stay on the line. Go ahead.
Well, what happens in that context is, since it's a murder trial, there is no bail. So that's why he has not been able to get out of jail pending his criminal trial. Now, there's been that Drew's Law, and we've talked about that before on these airwaves, where they are attempting to use hearsay testimony from his previous wife.
Okay, right.
And so they're attempting, so that has been litigated through the trial court and through the Court of Appeals. I'm not sure if it's gone to the Illinois Supreme Court or not. The appellate court struck down a lot of the evidence against him, saying that it could not be used in his criminal case because, again, how do you cross-examine somebody on a hearsay statement? Oh, she said this, she said that. When did she say it? Well, a couple of years ago. Well, in what context did she say it? We don't know. So that's always a difficult situation when you allow hearsay evidence, but they really want to get Drew Peterson, so they pass this legislation. So the situation now is they have filed a motion to dismiss the criminal case. I'm not sure if that's been heard. So while all these motions have been heard by the trial court and issues have gone up on appeal, that's why he's stayed in jail this amount of time.
Oh, okay, so it's not just the state.
No, it's not just the state. He's had issues where they're litigating whether the evidence comes in because his attorney does not want that evidence to come in, so he's going to vigorously litigate those evidentiary issues before the case goes to a jury trial, because if it comes in, and he gets convicted based upon those hearsay statements, it may be a basis for appeal, but why would he want to have the potential for that conviction over his head if he can avoid it?
How can you take the word, hearsay? I don't even see how that, can be allowed. I mean, I could be testifying for somebody in court, and I could say, well, I heard it from this Stadababa on the street. Well,
that's why we don't allow it.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for working.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks for working Stadibaba into it, too.
Not every day we hear that.
Not every day. You think it every day, but not every day we hear it. Big Rich, how are you? How bad is it out there?
It's not bad where I am. I'm on the Skyway heading into the merge and stopped at the bakery for a couple of job sites, and it's been pretty wide open. And the reason I did that is because I heard that kind of the Borman and Bishop board and stuff was kind of a chocolate mess. So.
Well, good. And which bakery did you go to?
Sweet House, of course.
And do you know the address at that place?
I'm going to say, after all these years, it's 3805.
Yeah, and there's a certain kind of, he's a little bit off, but he makes an excellent donut in the back. What's his name?
Well, do we want to go Naked Dave or just Dave?
Just Dave for now, because evidently that Dave the Naked Donut Maker thing worked against him there for a while. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Hey, I have a question for Dave.
Sure.
You know, when, excuse me 1 second, let me clear my throat. I have a little bit of a cold. Hey, when I was listening to Mr. Zeller on the Preacher Show earlier in the week, he had also was talking about the Indiana State Fair, the lawsuits going on.
Sure, with the tort claim capping.
Yeah, and about what's the difference between doing it separately and then the attorney, we won't mention his name because he's got a lot of billboards, but he's trying to get a class action lawsuit. I'll hang up in them, but what's the advantage, well, besides getting a third of the total money to doing a class action as opposed to just going with whatever the tort claims are? Thanks.
Well, in reference to a tort claim notice is something that's required in the state of Indiana. Normally, it's 180 days after the loss that you have to file a notice with the governmental entity advising them that you intend to make a claim. With the state of Indiana, that time period has been extended. But there's also, as part of the Tort Claims Act, there are certain immunities that the government has where in certain instances, for example, whether or not the police properly investigated the crime, they're immune. You can't sue them. Well, you should have arrested this individual for this, or you should not have arrested him for this in this situation, whatever it is. I mean, there could be wrongful arrest as well, but you can't, there's certain exceptions or certain immunities as relates to the tort claims cap. There's also the amount of money that the state and the municipalities can be held responsible for. There's a single amount and an aggregate amount. In this instance, Zeller has stated that we are going to pay the cap into the fund to determine, you know, who gets what. That's going to be up to the courts, but they're basically tendering that amount because they know that the damages for all the individuals that were injured in this and died is going to be in excess of what the cap is for the state of Indiana.